Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to one of my favorite poems in all of Leaves of Grass, Unended Day. Now, usually when I'm asked what's your favorite poem in Leaves of Grass, I'll report the one that I'm reading at the time. But I have to be honest, this poem for me has a history that supersedes almost all of the other poems in Leaves of Grass, and I'm going to dedicate this poem to my two pals, John and Hidoshi, because you guys were with me when we scaled Mount Fuji. And the question was, what text would I bring with me? And of course the obvious answer was Leaves of Grass. We did make the ascent. We spent the evening there on one of those later stages so that we could summit in the early morning as the sun was breaking, so that we could see that for the first time in our lives. And what did we read when we were there? Well, it in fact was this poem. And so this poem has a special place for me in my life, and I now am excited to be able to share with you. The other thing that makes this poem interesting is the notes that go along with it, which I also find quite fascinating. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, and that you were exposed already to our introductory set of comments for Goodbye My Fancy. We just finished with Pallid Wreath. Now, since we were commenting on those notes, and since we're commenting using our Nortons, let's go ahead first of all and get to the two notes. I find these fascinating notes in this little three-line poem. He'll begin. This is Whitman. Summer, country, life, several years. In my rambles and explorations, I found a woody place near the creek where for some reason the birds in happy mood seemed to resort in unusual numbers, especially at the beginning of the day and again at the ending. I was sure to get there the most copious bird concerts. I repaired there frequently at sunrise and also at sunset, or just before. Once the question arose in me, and again, I love this, because this is the curiosity of Whitman that we love so much, yes? Once the question arose in me, which is the best singing, the first or the lattermost? The first always exhilarated and perhaps seemed more joyous and stronger, but I always felt the sunset or late afternoon sounds more penetrating and sweeter, seemed to touch the soul. Often the evening thrushes, two or three of them, responding and perhaps blending. Though I missed some of the mornings, I found myself getting to be quite strictly punctual at the evening utterances. And then following another note, quote, "He went out with the tide and the sunset," end quote, was a phrase I heard from a surgeon describing an old sailor's death under peculiarly gentle conditions. During the Succession War, notice that's what he calls it, 1863-64, visiting the Army hospitals around Washington. I told you guys, this is the heart. My book in the War One, he says early in Leaves of Grass. I formed the habit and continued to the end, whenever the ebb or flood tide began, the latter part of day, of punctually visiting those at that time populous wards of suffering men. Somehow, or I thought so, the effect of the hour was palpable. The badly wounded would get some ease and would like to talk a little or be talked to. Intellectual and emotional natures would be at their best. Deaths were always easier. Medicines seemed to have better effect when given then, and a lulling atmosphere would pervade the wards. Similar influences, similar circumstances in ours, day close, after great battles, even with all their horrors. I had more than once the same experience on the fields covered with fallen or dead. Now, our Nortons will also tell us that this poem was first published in Goodbye My Fancy, 1891. Now, I love this poem because it does so much in three lines. You'll remember Ended Day from Song at Sunset, Splendor of Ended Day. And now here's the poem, Unended Day. The soothing sanity and blitheness of completion, the pomp and hurried contest, glare and rush are done. Now, triumph, transformation, jubilant. Now, right away, let's point out, you got three lines and you got three exclamation points to finish. The trinities are ubiquitous in Leaves of Grass, especially in the final two annexes, as we pointed out. Notice we'll begin with the word soothing. 14 times in Leaves of Grass that word gets used. Hear all these S sounds when it's read. It's beautiful. Sanity will take us back to Sing the Body Electric 5. Blitheness is used one time in Leaves of Grass, and it's here. I'm stunned by this, that here we are, near the very end of Leaves of Grass, and we're still getting words that are only used for the first time and only time in Leaves of Grass. I love that. Notice, it is the soothing sanity and blitheness, happiness, joy, of completion. Now, completion will get used with all thy gifts, as well as these carols, so we've heard this 2 other times. Completion, culmination. And then he'll continue. The pomp, which takes us back to Lilac 6, and hurried contest glare. Notice it will make us think immediately of drum taps, no question. Notice it's hyphenated. Contest, glare, and rush are done. In other words, it's the end of a day, but it's also the end of a battle. Okay, it's the end. It's when we can finally go, it's the end of a school day. Think of it that way, right, for you guys. It's the end of a school day. Now, of course, the immediacy of that word, now, and then he gets his 3s. Triumph will take us back to starting from Palmanock 19. I mean, go back and just look at that amazing last section of Palmanock and the use of the word triumph. Transformation. And this word, you'll remember it in Visor. You'll remember it to think of time, passage 7. If you'll think about it, Leaves of Grass is about transformation. This is the book of poems that's constantly talking about how everything gets transformed, because he's such a believer in evolution. How everything is always moving. How everything is always transcending and including. Here, it's everything is changed, obviously, in that gloaming time in the evening, right? Everything is beautifully changed. Transformation, and then finally, a word that only gets used 1 time in all of Leaves of Grass with the spelling jubilant. That is to say, back to Song of Joys. Go back and just read that poem all the way through to enjoy reading this poem together. And what are we going to say about a poem like this at 2a? Well, I think his arguing is that the most precious time of the day is the evening after the hard work has all been done. Now, if that's true in life, I wonder, he says, if that will be true in the final moments of my life. When it comes time for me to leave the park, and I can't swing anymore, and I have to go to the van, just like they taught me when I was 5, and I didn't want to go to the van, but they said, you got to go to the van. The van's always there, right? We ain't met no 200-year-old people. We know. Everybody goes to the van. Nobody gets to swing in the park forever. And because of that, these last 3 words, triumph, transformation, jubilant, all of a sudden it becomes so important. Did you swing well? That's the question, right? At 2b, well, I love the power of the 2 notes. It just makes this poem that much more powerful to me. And I love, obviously, the exclamation points and the trinities that are a part of this. At 3a, and I really do think that Keats had a lot to do with the poetry of Leaves of Grass. Ode to a Nightingale, that 1819 offering. I mean, just go back and just read that. See how he uses the word leaves in that poem. See how he uses the language of forlorn. We've given full lectures on it at learnstrong.net. Finally, a 3b to own a poem like this. Which one of do you prefer, the sunrise or the sunset? They both are, of course, majestic. And on that morning, sitting there on Mount Fuji, I was able to enjoy a sunrise and a beautiful poem about the sunset. Thank you.